Hey, I'm Mike from Sons Liberty Gunworks, and we're going to talk a little bit about the A5 system. So I get asked this a lot, what is the difference between the A5 system and the mil-spec buffer system? And I get asked if it really is a legitimate improvement to the carbine. I believe it is, and here's why. The A5 system uses a rifle length spring. So a rifle length spring versus a carbine length spring. This allows us to push more weight without over buffering the gun. It is possible to over buffer a gun. When you do that, you can start seeing premature gas ring failure, things like that. So this allows us to push a heavier weight because we're distributing that load over more wire. So one of the things I think it improves is it makes the gun a little bit more forgiving to input. By input, I mean ammunition types, adding a suppressor, even some overgassed guns. This is going to probably improve the function of that and make it, again, a little bit more forgiving. The A5 system uses a proprietary buffer. If you can see, it is longer than a standard carbine buffer. And the extension itself is longer, right? So the A5 extension is going to be a little bit longer than a carbine extension. Again, this allows us to use more weight, heavier weight, longer springs. It does a pretty good job. Another interesting aspect of this is if you take a standard buffer and you shake it, you can hear those weights bouncing around back and forth. When you do that with an A5 system, you don't. And the reason is because the A5 system uses what's called a biasing spring to keep all those buffer weights in the same place at all times. So an important function of a buffer is for those internal weights to be able to slingshot inside the buffer body. Once that buffer pushes that bolt home, those weights also slingshot forward, and that's what kind of keeps that bolt into battery. This does the same thing. Those weights are still being able to slingshot forward, but when that bolt begins to unlock and that carrier starts to overcome this mass, the buffer body is not having to catch up to the internal weights. So it's a little bit smoother and more consistent. Those buffer weights are always going to be pressed against the buffer, the internal face of the buffer body. It just makes, I think, a little bit more consistent gun. I do think it's a legitimate improvement, especially if you're running suppressed, especially if your gun's a little bit overgassed, or if you take our approach and you want to push the most amount of weight you can back there, because that is what's pushing that bolt back into battery. So that's the A5 system, guys. Thanks a lot.